So, recently in Destiny, loadout swapping has been a frequently discussed topic, specifically in regards to exotic armor and armor mods. With Bungie having announced a modifier in the upcoming Right of Denying activity, where swapping exotic armor takes away all of your abilities, people on Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube have been discussing whether or not this is a good idea. Personally, I have an opinion that I don't think I've seen anywhere else, and I want to talk about it as I believe it is the best course. I should preface with some context regarding myself. I would say I lean more towards the hardcore community, considering I raid somewhat often, have all raid and dungeon titles, and have flawless every dungeon. However, I do not partake in speedruns or low mans, as while impressive, I view them personally as an artificial challenge which doesn't really appeal to me. I should also say that I've only started raiding since joining my clan in October 2021, and before that I had done very little raids as I was a solo player. So I want to make it clear that I would not class myself as a casual player right now, although I have been on both sides of the spectrum before. With that out of the way, here's my main opinion. I believe that in raids and dungeons, all gear, with the exception of weapons, should be locked. Before I explain why I have this opinion, I should clarify that I am not advocating for locked loadouts to be added to raids and dungeons. There is a difference which I shall elaborate on. Locked loadouts in raids and dungeons, in my opinion, is a terrible idea and would not work, as it would limit Bungie when it comes to creativity and balance as a whole, and raid and dungeon would need to be able to be finished with the same loadouts. Not only would this restrict Bungie's ability to create multiple unique boss encounters in future endgame content, but it also isn't compatible with the game right now. An excellent example of this would be Crota's End, where Crota and EU are often killed with completely different DPS strats, swords for Crota and either linears with div or grenade launchers for EU. Forcing players to have to use one DPS strategy for all bosses within an activity would severely weaken the gameplay quality of endgame content, as you would be forced to use an unoptimal loadout for certain parts of said activity. So, when I say gear should be locked, I would implement it in the following way. Upon starting a raid or dungeon encounter, you should be unable to swap your subclass, anything within your subclass such as aspects and fragments, armor, armor mods, and artifact perks until you either complete the encounter or you wipe. This form of locking players' gear would not be as restrictive as locked loadouts, and it wouldn't limit Bungie's creativity when it comes to creating new endgame content, as you would not be forced to use the same loadout for a whole activity, and you would be able to try out different strats in between failed attempts. Locking players to one loadout the whole time only works for Nightfalls, as they have one main boss with severely less complex mechanics, and as a result often more options when it comes to DPS, as opposed to more complex bosses found within raids and dungeons. Right, with the distinction between my idea and locked loadouts explained, why do I advocate for locked gear? In my opinion, build crafting is supposed to be a commitment. Now, I know we Destiny players defo don't know what commitment feels like because we get zero bitches, but it's time for us to learn. In my opinion, you should have to weigh up the value of different abilities and stats and choose to sacrifice some in exchange for others. Being able to swap gear mid-encounter, I believe, largely shatters that premise. The most obvious example being swapping exotic armor and swapping from scavenger or healing based leg mods such as recuperation to surge mods via swapping your boots. In my opinion, I should not be able to swap from Peregrine Greaves pre-DPS phase to Cuirass during the DPS phase for the final boss of Sundered, because the whole point of picking an exotic, you know, the gear that's supposed to only have one of equipped at a time, is that you're supposed to make a commitment. I might as well have two exotics equipped at that point. Now, some people may say, oh, if you don't want to play like that, then don't swap your gear. Don't force your idea of how to play the game onto others. And on paper, sure, that might be an okay argument. However, just because I don't want to play the game in a certain way, doesn't mean I'm not gonna do it. Speaking from personal experience, the casual audience doesn't swap their gear mid-activity 95% of the time, as there's no reason for them to do so. So in my opinion, this is mainly a discussion affecting the upper echelon of players. Now, does it only affect the World First Raiders? No! Obviously, it affects a lot more than that, but the reason I bring this up is because the highest tier players are almost always going to use the meta, whether that be gear or strats. But just because we use it doesn't mean we enjoy it, we just do it because it makes makes sense. I swap gear during solo flawless runs because it makes sense to do so. It doesn't mean I enjoy that it's a feature, and it doesn't mean I'd be sad to see it go. In fact, it would be the opposite. Same can be said for every weapon that has ever been meta. I've enjoyed using it for the time it's been meta, but I don't want it to be meta forever, so I'd be happy if it was nerfed. Just because you use something doesn't mean you like it. More sweatier players are always going to use the best. Us wanting stuff gone doesn't mean we're trying to force others to play the game in a certain way. It just means we don't want to be forced to play the game in a certain way. And the argument of just don't do it then is essentially forcing us to engage in artificial difficulty. And as I stated earlier, I don't care for artificial things in this game, personally. There's also something that I haven't seen anyone bring up yet in regards to this argument, and that is the artifact. Ever since loadouts were introduced in Lightfall, Bungie, as far as I'm aware, have never spoken on why artifact perks are not saved with your loadouts, and has been assumed that loadouts don't include these perks due to a technical limitation. Now this very much may be true, but even if it is true, I believe there is another reason in play. Similar to how exotics are designed to only allow you to equip one at a time, final column artifact perks, which are pretty much exotic level, are designed to only allow the player to have two at a time. Could you imagine if you were able to swap your artifact perk mid-encounter? And yes, I know that it's technically possible right now, but it requires a lot more time than if you could just save artifact perks to loadouts. Going back to the Peregrine Greaves and Curious example from earlier, being able to swap your artifact perks with loadouts would mean you could equip Limit Breaker when you Thunder Crash, and then swap back to your Peregrine Greaves loadout after hitting your Thunder Crash, swapping back to Particle Reconstruction while keeping Defibrillating Blast on the whole time. Essentially having 3 artifact perks on at once. This example is proof how artifact perks in loadouts, a heavily requested feature by the way, would mean Bungie would either have to make endgame content harder to compensate, which casual players would hate, reduce the power of future artifact perks, or do nothing which would cause a massive power creep. I personally would love for artifact perks to be saved to loadout, but without some limits on swapping gear it would be too powerful in my opinion, which is a real shame. So, to summarise, I want gear to be locked mid-encounter to bring back actual weight when it comes to your build crafting choices without crippling Bungie's creativity, while also allowing artifact mods to be added to saved loadouts without it being broken. I mentioned earlier that I wouldn't include weapons in this however, allowing you to still swap them mid-encounters, and there are 2 reasons for this. The first is that there are certain exotics like Outbreak, and perks, such as Shoot to Loot, that I think you would kill when it comes to their meta viability should weapon swapping be locked mid-encounter. However, I admit this is more of a personal thing, as I personally like it when exotics have niche parts of the game when they're good, such as Microcosm for Tormentors, Outbreak for dealing with boss ammo economy issues, Parasite for quick burst DPS, etc. The second reason as to why I would keep weapon swapping links back to the main reason I want gear locked in the first place, which is to bring back commitments to loadouts. Unlike exotic armor, armor mods, and your subclass, weapons don't always fit into a loadout. That may sound odd, but let me explain what I mean with an example. Right now, my main weapon selection that I enjoy using is Heritage, Zalu's Bane, and Gjallarhorn. As a Titan, this set of weapons is objectively better on Sunbreaker due to Zalu's Bane's ability to make sunspots with Incandescent. However, these weapons are still meta on every subclass, even though those other subclasses, those weapons don't synergize with them, or even the exotic armor I'm using, which is the foundation of every build in the game. Queenbreaker is another example of this right now. Everyone is using that weapon due to it being the best DPS option in the game, not because it fits into a specific build. Therefore, allowing weapons to be swapped doesn't go against my ideology of having to commit to builds, as weapons can be used just because they are very good and not necessarily due to build synergy. Now, if you wanted to argue that you should have to commit to only one set of weapons during an encounter, that's fine, but Bungie already kind of did that in Year 1 of Destiny 2 with the Prestige mode of Spire of Stars and Eater of Worlds, and that was almost universally hated. Besides, unlike armor, I, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people, don't often swap their weapons mid-encounter, with the only group that largely does this being speedrunners and low manners with things such as Shoot to Loot and Fourth Horseman. And as I said earlier, I personally don't care for that part of the game. However, to be clear, I wouldn't really care if they applied my locked gear idea to weapons or not. It doesn't bother me. I'm just saying there's an argument to exclude them from my proposed changes, which I agree with. I mean, obviously, because I'm the one making the argument. I have two final arguments for why I would want gear outside of weapons to be locked mid-encounter that I will go over very quickly. First, I believe we should try to keep PC and console as balanced as possible. Despite that being impossible, PC's always going to have an advantage, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to keep things fair. Menus take a lot longer to load on console, and as such PC has an advantage in that regard, which I don't like. I should mention for a bit of context that I've played this game on both console and PC for at least 1,000 hours each, 2,500 on PC, and in my opinion, this is a massive pain point for consoles that I just don't like to see in the game. Finally, I think Marvel's Spider-Man, yes I know this is a completely different genre, but stay with me here, is a prime case study for my final argument. In my opinion, when it comes to gaming in general, any mechanic that forces you or encourages you to go into your menus mid-fight, it's just bad design. This was one of the biggest difference between 2018 Spider-Man 1 and 2023 Spider-Man 2, when the gadget wheel was added, and, despite some story shortcomings, the sequel was a much better game, gameplay-wise, and I think a lack of a reason to be encouraged to enter your menu mid-fight was a prime example of why the second game was better gameplay-wise. Gameplay and combat was just a lot smoother. I don't think Destiny, or any game for that matter, should be encouraging players to go into their menu mid-encounter. It just ruins the gameplay flow. So, commitment to builds, artifact mods being added to loadouts, PC/console imbalance, and encourage menu use mid-fight. These are the four main reasons I want Bungie to do something about not swap or gear swapping in general, and my proposed change, I believe, would do something about that while maintaining the niches of certain exotic weapons, not limiting design/creativity at Bungie, and allow for quality of life features such as artifact mods and loadouts to be added. As I approach the end of my mini rant, I'd like to address the main counter-argument for my locked gear idea, which is of course the fact that some players would be locked onto ammo-generating tools, such as Xenotaph, for entire encounters. While true, I don't believe we should view the ammo economy problems plaguing Destiny 2 right now as a gatekeeper to my proposed loadout swapping changes or any not swap changes, but instead as another problem that needs to be solved at the same time. This is a much deeper topic that I might make a video on in the future, but in short, I believe that orange bar major enemies should be guaranteed to drop heavy ammo, so that players are not forced onto ammo generating exotics such as Aeons and Xenotaph. I believe every boss in the game should be beatable without relying on ammo generating tools or RNG. And these tools should be an option for players who want more ammo to either kill a boss quicker or to provide more leeway in case you aren't perfect with your accuracy. They should not be a necessity, and I think if this change was implemented, ammo generating tools will become more of an option instead of a necessity, and instead of being hard meta, making my locked gear suggestion even more viable for the game than it is in its current state. Finally, is locked gear actually implementable on a technical level? Now, I'm not a game dev in the slightest. I'm just a normal guy looking in. But as a normal guy looking in, I believe two things are needed in order for locked gear to happen. First, Bungie needs the ability to lock certain pieces of gear, but not everything, to allow players to still swap their weapons. I believe this is possible due to Dual Destiny, as that mission proved that Bungie is to an extent able to do this. During the mission your subclasses are locked, but everything else isn't and can still be swapped freely, so I think that is possible. Second, can Bungie make it that gear both is locked but also unlocks at different times within the same activity without leaving? From memory, Bungie hasn't done something like this before, and I see this as the only potential technical limitation to my idea. But look, I'm not a game dev in the slightest. It's probably way harder to do than I've made it out to be. Right, that's my locked gear idea for Destiny. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you lot in a bit.